What is the first weapon you think of when you talk about ancient long-range weapons? Probably a bow, or the more recent crossbow. What about the sling? This seemingly very simple weapon consisting of only ropes and a stone was much more effective than the bow. For example, you have probably heard the story of how David, armed with a sling, was able to defeat the huge enemy Goliath. And you probably think that's just a legend. But the people of antiquity knew what this formidable weapon was capable of. You can find stories of how the slinger could kill a bull from a distance of 500 feet and with a single blow. And the hero of Alexandria, a Greek mathematician and engineer, wrote that a lead projectile fired from a sling would pierce a bronze cuirass and get stuck in the body of an opponent. And no special projectiles were needed for this weapon. When you ran out of ammunition, you could just start shooting rocks. Later in the Middle Ages, people decided to modify this weapon and built a giant version of the sling, which could throw a 300-pound projectile. Europe was dotted with castles in the 12th century, and capturing a castle was an important objective during warfare in the Middle Ages for several reasons. First, castles were often strategically located on high ground or in key positions, such as river crossings, which made them valuable military targets. Second, castles often held valuable resources such as food, weapons, and supplies that could help support troops during a long campaign. And sieging a castle was very hard work, so numerous siege machines were invented in the Middle Ages, the most fearsome and powerful of which was the trebuchet. It was a devastating projectile-throwing machine that used gravity to throw very heavy projectiles, causing serious damage to the fortress walls. Despite the appearance of the siege machine, the construction itself is quite simple. It is essentially a giant sling. A lever and two arms, short and long, are attached to a stable frame. The long arm has a rope saddle for projectiles, and the short arm has a counterweight. Even tree trunks could be used as a counterweight. When the counterweight was lowered, the shoulder with the roping saddle would rise and launch the projectile. There is virtually no consensus as to where and when the trebuchet was developed. However, the earliest mention of it is found as early as 1187, and it is known that they have been used since the Third Crusade, thanks to which the Crusaders were able to take Acre and Constantinople. But by the 14th century, giant siege weapons appeared on the battlefield, and the most famous of these is the Warwolf. It is the largest and most powerful trebuchet ever built. It was built in Scotland in the late 13th century and was used during the siege of Stirling Castle in 1304. The Warwolf was capable of accurately launching projectiles weighing up to 298 pounds at a distance of 660 feet. It had a throwing arm of over 49 feet long and could launch projectiles at 120 miles per hour. It is difficult to say how tall this weapon was when assembled, but some sources state that it was 300 to 400 feet high, which is very hard to believe. But it is known that 30 carts carried it as it was assembled, and it took at least 3 months to assemble this giant. A contemporary account of the siege of Stirling Castle says that even before it was completed, the Scottish soldiers offered to surrender for fear that the weapon might destroy the entire castle. But King Edward I of England sent the peace party back to the castle, declaring, "You do not deserve any grace, but must surrender to my will." The King of England decided to continue the siege and witnessed the weapon's destructive power. According to the legend, the trebuchet was so powerful that the shock waves from its projectiles caused the women in the castle to miscarry. Still, the Golden Horde only needed a small trebuchet, and a single lucky shot was enough to take out about 50% of Europe's population. But how was this possible? In the early 14th century, there was an outbreak of plague in Asia, and the nomads of this Golden Horde managed to bring the disease to Europe. During the siege of the Genoese fortress in the Crimean Peninsula in 1346, Golden Horde Khan Janibek used small trebuchets to throw the bodies of those who died of the plague behind the walls. Unfortunately for the Khan, the siege failed and he retreated from the fortress. However, it was enough to infect not only all the people in the fortress with the infected bodies, but also the rats, who together with the Genoese traders spread the disease all over Europe. Over the next 7 years, it led to the extinction of 30 to 60% of Europe's inhabitants. A few small trebuchets wiped out more people than an atomic bomb could. The last known use of a trebuchet in combat was at Cortez's battle with the Aztecs in 1521. Cortez did not want to waste gunpowder, so he ordered the construction of a trebuchet that could throw stones weighing 11 kilograms. The idea was unsuccessful. One of the projectiles flew vertically upward and destroyed the machine itself. Speaking of the Aztecs, we mentioned the Jaguar warriors in our previous video and said that they used the macuayul, a wooden club with several embedded blades of obsidian. And you might think this weapon is ineffective compared to the steel sword of the conquistadors, but you would be wrong. The conquistadors underestimated this weapon, which later became the Spanish conqueror's main fear. In a report by one of Hernan Cortez's soldiers, it is said that this obsidian sword was capable of decapitating a horse with one blow. By the time Cortez came to America, the Aztecs had still not mastered iron, and one might say they were in the last stages of the